welcome back. We are doing our chapter on ethics and how we navigate ethical situations in our human relations course. Welcome. The topics for this video include to be able to define ethics and give examples of ethical decisions that we make in our life, and to explain the levels of ethics and how they relate to human relations. But first, let's define what ethics is. We know from our prior chapters that emotional intelligence is one of our key skills and abilities that we can have as leaders, managers, employees, citizens of our organizations and of society. And if you remember that emotional intelligence piece has 4 different components to it, and one of them is self-management. And truly, that's where ethics really comes in, because it helps us with decision making. So we define ethics as a set of values that define right and wrong. A set of values that define right and wrong. And values, if you remember, we've talked about them before. Values are the principles or standards that a person or a society finds desirable. And that's really what makes it tricky to define ethics, is that it depends on the person and it depends on the situation. I mean, in a general level, but it's really distinguishing right from wrong. But it's a little tricky to find that universal definition of ethics. So we have 4 levels of ethics for companies, or for us. And that's important to point out, is that companies and organizations are really made up of humans, which makes it harder to distinguish personal ethics or individual ethics from organizational ethics, because the ethics of the company depends on the people who are in it, right? So they are intertwined. Individual ethics, corporate ethics, intertwined. So our first level is societal, right? This is the globe. This is the society. This is our top level issues when it comes to ethics. Things such as our environment globally, whether or not we're using child labor in other parts of the world, right? So top level issues. And companies might engage in societal level ethical issues, because we might choose as a company to not use child labor in another part of the world. The second level is stakeholder, and we define stakeholder as anyone who is affected by a company's action. So a stakeholder is anyone who that's my computer talking to me saying it's 9 o'clock. A stakeholder is anyone who's affected by a company's actions or is impacted by a company. So these would be policies that impact our customers, our employees, our suppliers, people within our community, rivers within our town, animals in our nature, right? So the notification of the potential dangers of a company's product or service may impact these. So the stakeholder level is anybody who's touched by a company. So it could be employees, it could be an internal policy surrounding pay that impacts our employees, although we have that internal policy as our third level on the next slide. But it could also be considered a stakeholder level. Or it could be that the public is impacted by how we do business in our organization, if we're polluting the environment locally, etc. So the third level, as I just mentioned, is the internal policy level. And these are the internal relationships between a company and their employees. So how do we manage and run and do things within our organization? So things here would be fairness in management, pay, employee participation, voice, etc. So that is our third level. And then lastly, our fourth level is our personal issues. And this is at the individual level. How do we treat each other? How do we treat other people within our organization? Are we doing the right thing when we show up in meetings, when we execute tasks? Are we frank, diplomatic, problem-focused? Or do we gossip, manipulate, and hurt, right? So one of the biggest ethical challenges is when our company's ethics do not meet our own personal ethics. So we look at the company ethics and the values of the company, and we align whether or not that matches with our own ethics. And so sometimes we have to self-select out of the organization if there is grave, big misalignment. So here is the 4 levels of ethics in organizations, just in a visual. It has a pyramid where we see the bottom of the pyramid being the personal issues, the second layer being the internal policy issues, the third layer is the stakeholder issues, and the fourth and final layer at the top of the pyramid is the societal issues. So this is the 4 levels of ethics in organizations displayed just in a visual pyramid image. And so for you to consider here is, how important is it for you to work for an organization that has values and ethics like yours? Because if you have dissonance on a daily basis, that might be very, very challenging. And so when you make decisions, and the ethical decisions that you have to make, which come often because there's a lot of gray zone situations, how do you deal with them? How have you dealt with them in the past? So something for you to think about. In summary, ethics is defined as a set of values that define right and wrong. Values are standards and principles that a person finds desirable, that are important to this person or to a society. There are 4 levels of ethical issues. The first is a societal issue that deals with bigger questions such as taking care of the environment, capitalism, embargos. Sometimes companies get involved in these level ethics based on their company policies, such as not using child labor in overseas factories, as an example. The second level of ethical issues is stakeholder issues. These are the things that stakeholders might care about, such as product safety. Internal policy issues are at the 3rd level. This includes things like pay and how we treat our employees. And lastly, personal level ethics is our last level of ethical issues, which refers to how we treat others within our organization. That's a wrap. See you next time.